Welcome to the Teapot Reads. My name's Sam. I'm the Teapot. This is what I'm currently reading, and I'm so happy to see you today. Hello and welcome back, and welcome to a video I have been looking forward to filming for a long time. This is my favorite reads of the year video. Objectively, these may not always be the best books, but they are the ones that I love the most, and I think subjectively are the best books I read this year. And there are some really fantastic reads. I'm going to do my best to try not to say I loved this book with every book, because you know I loved all of these books, but it will be hard to restrain myself. So I guess take a shot every time I say I love this book. A couple things I thought about when thinking about what defined my best books of the year, because I read over 100 books last year. I don't remember exactly how many. There will be a wrap-up stat type video talking about last year's reading when I get the chance to film it, but until then I know it was over 100 books, so weaning it down to the top 10 was a little difficult, and so I kind of set myself some guidelines as like, what do I look for in a best book? What do I determine make something a best book? That's something I want to keep on my shelf forever, has a lot of value to me. So it came down to three things. One, was I obsessed with it? I think this is the most important aspect, especially for me. I read a lot. I know I say I read slowly, but I do read a lot because that's pretty much all I do with my free time. And there is this like spark that causes like obsession in certain books. And if a book has it, that is automatically a book that is going to make it into my favorites, make it onto my shelf forever, because it means I loved it, it means I couldn't stop thinking about it. So if I was obsessed with it, if it had that special little spark, automatically it made it into the contending list for my top 10 of the year. Not every book on this list had that spark, but I think every book in the top, well, my top three definitely all had that spark. And two of the other books in this list also have that spark that I just like was frothing at the mouth, obsessed with. The second thing I considered was whether it was objectively a good book. This didn't have as much weight as did it make me obsessed with it, but I did still think it was important because, especially when you're getting into the territory of books I wasn't necessarily obsessed with but did really like, the better written book, the better constructed book is something that I definitely think was the better book. And as a sort of addendum to it, it was, did the book stick with me? There were some really good books I read this year that didn't even make it onto honorable mentions because they just did not stick with me. A Far Wilder Magic is a great example of that. I loved that book. I think I gave it four and a half stars, and it was fantastic when I read it. I seriously enjoyed myself. I loved the atmosphere. I liked the characters a lot. I really, really appreciated the ending. But a month after I'd finished reading it, I probably could not have told you the details of it. So a book that doesn't stick with me is not a book that really ever makes it into my favorite. It is a book that makes it easier to reread, but I'm also more keen to reread books that I remember enough of to have super fond memories. And then number three was, would I reread the book? Every single book in my top 10 is something I would absolutely reread. And there's one in here that I've already kind of started rereading. There's another one that literally every day I consider, I say, is this the day I start rereading it? It will be reread this year. Rereading is something I love to do. I don't do a lot of it necessarily. There are some years where I do a lot of rereading. 2020 was a big reread year for me. I think like 30% of everything I read that year was a reread, if not more. Any book that is rereadable and you get something new out of it when you reread it is something very special to me. That's why I'm afraid to read some books that I loved when I was much younger, because I feel like when I reread it, I will be like, this isn't A, as good, or B, there's nothing to get out of it a second time. But I think that is a huge mark of a great book if you can reread it and get stuff out of it a second time and enjoy it just as much, if not more. So those were the three things I really considered when narrowing it down to my top books of the year. And then I used a website I found. I think it's pronounced Karen Arielin. It's down below in the description. It's great. It's karenarielin.github.io, The Ranker. It is a fantastic website. I've bookmarked it. It's one of my favorites. It is probably the best website I used last year. It just helps ranking things so well. I've never had like a ranking website or process that like is just this good. And yes, I loved it. It's perfect. So I use that to help me rank it. And that is how I got down to my top 10. I'm going to try to give you like a quick description of each book, and I'm also going to try to give you a couple sentences as to why I love the book. I don't want to go super in depth with this because some of them already have reviews. Actually, I was going to say quite a few, but I think it's just two of them. Two of them have reviews already, but I'm not going to go super in depth with any of them because this video would be forever, and I just uploaded a 2.5 hour long bookshelf tour, so I don't think you guys want another several hour long video of me talking about books yet. But let's go. So coming in at number 10, we have All of Us Villains, and I'm also putting in here the sequel, All of Our Demise. This is by Amanda Foody and Charlie Herman. It's Herman, right? Yeah, Herman. These, not gonna say it. There's sort of a little bit of Hunger Games to these books. It is about a magical competition and the 8. I always get this number fucked up. It is how many families? 7 families. Every year they send, or not every year, but every time there's a competition rolls around, they send a champion, normally a kid, to compete, and it is a competition to the death. The last one standing wins, and wins for their family access to high magic, which is a much more powerful form of magic, and until recently in this world, thought extinct. The novels begin with opening up. The competition is almost upon us. For the first time ever, there are tourists in this town ready to watch and engage with the competition, and like basically, because they can't like participate, but they want to watch, they want to see who wins, because everyone had thought high magic didn't exist until this tell-all came out talking about the competition, talking about high magic, and talking specifically about how the Lowe family, which Alistair Lowe is one of our competitors, has had this magic forever and how they're horrible. And also just talking about like all the dirt of all the families. It's great. This book has sections from the tell-all at the beginning of each chapter, and it is fantastic. And part of the story is the characters don't know who wrote the tell-all. There are people who have suspicions and guesses, but you don't know who wrote the tell-all until later in the story. We follow 4 of the protagonists: Alistair, Isabel, Bryony, and Gavin. I think Gavin was my favorite. I'm coming out on King Gavin, I think. He just had probably my favorite type of character arc across the 2 books. I do have a review up for this duet. I do recommend checking that out if you want my full thoughts, but to summarize it, basically, this series is dark, and I love that it was allowed to get dark. The characters were fantastic, very easy to love, even when they were doing horrible things. And more than anything, I think the political twists and turns and the people switching sides, switching allies was fantastic. Completely believable. You understood why character would go from A to B to C, and why there were left turns at every letter, and you were still rooting for them all. It was fantastic. It was great. I am 100% looking forward to what Amanda Foody and Charlie Herman do next, because they're writing another series together, and I am just, so excited. I absolutely loved their writing. It was a very seamless co-writing, which most co-writing I think is seamless, but this one, I think more than ever, it felt like the 2 of them were just born to write together. It was perfect. Coming in at number 9, we have Babel. This is the Fairy Loot edition because it's really pretty, and I wanted to just show it off a little bit. The edges. I have a review up for this as well. I think I have 2 reviews, a spoiler and a non-spoiler review, as well as a reading vlog, I think. I'm not 100% sure about the reading vlog. This is probably a lot of people's favorite book, or one of their favorite books of the year. It is fantastic, and technically I think it is a very good book, although it does have some slow moments. I think I would be surprised if you haven't heard of Babel, but it is basically about colonization, and it is about translation. And in this world, the year is what? 1836. In 1836 or thereabouts, Robin is taken from his home in China, basically raised in England to be a translator. Translators are able to use magic by inscribing words on silver bars. So like one side of the bar will have a word in English, and then the other side of the bar will have a word in another language. And the less translated the languages, the less common the languages, the more powerful the magic is on these bars. And so translators are highly valued people, but Robin is not white, and he faces a lot of difficulty because of it. We actually follow the whole cohort that Robin is in, and there's only one white character, and she's a woman. And so they all sort of deal with struggles of being a part of and also outside society. It is a book heavily to do with colonization and decolonization, and to a degree workers' rights, and just the effects that colonization has had on culture and language. And it also has a lot to do with identity, especially displacement of identity when your home is not necessarily your home. It is a fantastic book. Like I said, it does have a couple dry, slow moments. I think the second half is far better than the first half, although the first half definitely needs to set up a lot. It's not my favorite book this year because there just wasn't a lot going on at certain points, and the dark academia aspects can get kind of downtrodden. That being said, it's fantastic. I think I gave this one 5 stars, and deservedly so. It is written really well. It tackles a lot of really difficult concepts, and you know, you fall in love with the characters. It had me very emotional by the end of this book. Something I'm going to predict and put out into the world, and I don't think this is going to happen soon. I do not think this is something that will happen soon. I think it is something probably 15 to 20 years down the line. But I do think that someday, probably 15 to 20 years from now, R.F. Kuang will win a Nobel Prize in Literature. I'm going to put that out there. I think that she is really cultivating a writing style that is both very academic, very powerful, and also very engaging, which is important. So I think she's definitely on the path to that. And I think this, I haven't read Poppy War, so I can't say, but I think this is probably the book we'll all look back on and be like, that's where it started. That is where that path started. Number 8, we have The Stars Undying by Emery Robin. I don't think I've talked too much about this one. I read it at the very tail end of last year. This is a sci-fi space opera, political intrigue, reimagining of the stories of Cleopatra, Mark Antony, and Julius Caesar, and the relationships. I was not super keen on it. I was like, whatever, that sounds whatever. And then I saw a couple reviews on Goodreads that had me, oh my gosh. And so I picked it up and loved it. I devoured it. There's really not a better description I can give than what I just said. I will say that it starts sort of right before the Cleopatra character and the Julius Caesar character meet, and then we go to a certain point. It wraps up pretty nicely in this book, but I know it's a trilogy. I'm hoping that the book after this one follows these characters too, because I'm really curious, but I don't know if it's going to. I did cry during this book. It has one of the best, not plot twists, but emotional punches of any of the books I've read this year. It got me so good, and it really was the style of writing. This book, for all of the events that happen and the like action sequences, is not an action heavy book. It is very much a political heavy book, and it has a lot of beautiful writing. You'll hear about the action sequences, but you don't really see them, and I know some people dislike that. I really liked it. It actually reminded me a lot of Dune in that way, where you don't necessarily see all the action, but you are hearing about it secondhand, or you're hearing about the moments in between the action when the characters are talking, and it's enough to get you through those action scenes and then propel you forward through the story. And I think the political maneuverings are also very similar to Dune. You're not seeing everything laid out because you are in these characters' heads. The characters' names are Altagracia, and then his name is Matthias Sarin, is our Julius Caesar. And then of course we have Anita, who is our Mark Antony, but we only get Altagracia and Matthias Sarin as our sort of our narrators in this book. One of the things I loved most about this book was how much it stuck with me. Even though I did read it at the tail end of last year, I think about it frequently, and as soon as I finished reading it, I could not get it out of my head. It has such a potent, long-lasting emotional and intellectual impact. One of the things I loved most about this book is it is big, it is intricate, it is intense, and it is also beautiful. The language is superb. It is very flowy. It had me in its grip from the very beginning. Strongly recommend this one if you are looking to get into science fiction. I also listened to this as an audiobook, and the audiobook was phenomenal. So if you're looking for a great audiobook, Stars Undying is it. I also almost forgot to mention, it is a queer normative science fiction future, which quite a few of the books on this list are. I really love that trend. It's something that is so comforting in science fiction, and I'm just hoping to see and read more of it this year. I'm really looking forward to it. And on that note, one of my favorite author like quotes on this book, it is my favorite author quote on this book. It is fantastic. It's from Casey McQuistion, and she says, I think she uses she, her pronouns. She might use they, them. I'm sorry if I was wrong about that. Dazzling, transportive, boundless, precise, and dares to ask what if Mark Antony was the hottest butch girl in space? Yes, what a great question to ask. Okay, so my next book I don't actually own a copy of yet, and that is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. I always want to say peculiar, but The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. I listened to this on audiobook. I do have a copy coming. I ordered the Fairylit edition, and I'm so excited for that to arrive. It is definitely going to have a place of power on my shelves. It is so good. It is a cozy fantasy, and I will be talking about it in another video that I am putting out hopefully soon. We'll see if I can get myself together for it. Mika is one of these witches. She is a fairly lonesome and lonely character, and she's basically hired to help tutor 3 young witches who don't have anyone to teach them. This is a problem for a couple reasons, because witches gathering together tends to accrue a lot of magic and a lot of problems, and in order to keep their secrecy, you don't want them together. So Mika has always been raised to kind of think she can't be around other witches, but she is convinced, because they're young girls, to stay and to help them, and she grows closer to basically the whole family that is there, which is very much a found family type of situation. It is lovely and cozy and warm, and this is the story about Mika not only learning to not see herself as someone who has to be alone, but also learning to want to be loved. I think that's a trend in a couple of the books. It seems to be something I like reading about now that I say it aloud. Every character in this is stunning, and I think I've said cozy how many times, but it is truly a cozy book. It definitely skews closer to rom-com than fantasy, but I think that a fantasy reader would also really enjoy it. I really enjoyed it for those aspects. I loved the magic system. It's very simple, but it works really well, and it is cleverly the way it is written is very clever on the page, and the romance is pretty good. It's very, very, very sweet, and just very solid character building all around. I love found family tropes. I feel like I don't often read found family tropes that tickle that part of my brain that make me go, yes, I want that, but this one definitely tickled that part of my brain. Yeah, Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. I really want my copy so I can hold it and see it, because I listened to this on audiobook, and again, the audio narrator was fantastic, phenomenal, but I want the physical copy. Okay. Coming in at number 6, we actually have another romance, and that is A Lady for a Duke by Alexis Hall. This book made me a big Alexis Hall fan. I've already read another of his books this year. It wasn't as good as A Lady for a Duke. This is fantastic. It is a historical romance, so if you're not into that, probably not going to be for you, but if you have even an inkling, I strongly recommend it. It is fantastic. This is a story of Viola Carroll. She's trans, and at the Battle of Waterloo, basically she is pronounced and thought dead, and she takes that opportunity to basically leave her past life, her dead name, and return to life as the woman she's always been, but finally living it sort of freely, and she's taken the identity of Viola Carroll. I will say, going into it, her family is very supportive of her. I loved that. I love that for her. There's a lot of support for Viola and for her identity and for herself as a woman throughout this novel, and that was just really, really, really cheerful and charming and fantastic. Not to say that there aren't concerns for the character. There are some concerns given towards the sort of time period, like she has to keep it a secret, but it's not ever at any single point does any character make her feel ashamed or lesser for it, and it's fantastic. It's a very affirming book. And actually, I think the first book I've read that features a trans female protagonist, because I've read a couple with trans men, but I don't think trans women before. As much as she is trans, that's really not the plot of it. Her best friend her entire life was Justin de Vere, the Duke of Gracewood. Duke, I think. Yeah. Duke. The Duke of Gracewood. He thinks his best friend died at Waterloo, and he blames himself, and he is just miserable and upset, and basically Viola finds out that he's miserable and upset, and she's not necessarily ready to come out to him, doesn't know how that would even look, but thinks maybe she should see what she can do and offer him some comfort where she can. So she goes to him. She's kind of forced into it a little bit. Her family's like, you need to like help him and also help his sister who's stuck with him. And so Viola does. She goes, and that is where the story begins. It is a full romance. Like, it runs the gamut. You get so much. The whole novel is not just her comforting Justin DeVere. There is a lot more going on than that. But that is where it starts. And I will say one of the things I loved most about this book was the angst. It is not a fully angsty novel. Like, this whole book is not just angst, like will they, won't they. It's not will she tell him, how will he react. That is not the entirety of the book. And I'm so glad for it, because I don't think it would have been as fulfilling a story for either of the characters if that's all it was. That's not. But there is further angst, you know? It's like, you can't have a good romance without some angsty moments, but the beginning is full of it, and I was living for it. It's also very sweet. I love childhood friends to lovers. That is one of my favorite paths that characters can take, especially in romances. So I was really living for that. And the writing is just fantastic. Alexis Hall knows how to write. He is a master with words. He's very, very good at writing. I haven't read that much historical fiction. It is something I like as a genre, and it's something that this year definitely you'll see more of, because I'm planning to read more of it. But as one of my, not the first historical romance I've read, because I have been reading it for a couple years, but as an early entrance into the like pantheon of historical romances, I think this is just superb on every level. You probably know him better for his boyfriend material books. I haven't read those. I'm not a big fan of contemporary romance, but I think because it's him writing, I probably will pick them up. Going into our top 5. Okay, number 5. I actually almost forgot I had read this last year, because I read it fairly early in the year, or at least it felt like it, and it also feels like a book that has just been with me for a while. Number 5 is In Other Lands by Sarah Rees Brennan. And if you have read In Other Lands and you want to return to this world, she has actually written another short story. There's a short story in this, but there is another short story called Tears Waiting to be Diamonds that you can read online. I will link it down below, or at least I will link to their actions on how to read it down below. I think you have to sign up for a free subscription. I'm waiting for part 2 to post before I read it. In Other Lands is one of the best young adult novels ever written. And I am completely serious when I say that. This is about Elliot Schaefer, I think his last name is. When the novel starts, he's like 13. Let's see. Yeah, so he's 13 when the novel starts, and he is a prickly, unloved kid who doesn't necessarily want anyone to love him. He's done with that. He's moved on. He just wants to keep chugging forward and do his own thing, and he's a pacifist actually, which is really sweet. So he does kind of want to save the world in his own way. He finds out, because he can see another world, or like a staircase to another world, that he could go there and go to school there if he wanted, and he says, yeah, sure, it sucks here, why not give that a try? I want to see mermaids. And so he goes to school. The school is much more like a camp. It actually gave kind of Camp Half-Blood vibes more than it gives like Hogwarts vibes. And basically the two paths you can take are the like pacifist route or the like warrior route. And he has he doesn't have time for the warriors. But while he is there, he meets an elf. She is the only elf at the school. Her name is Serene, and the Serene heart in the chaos of battle, Serene, and he falls in love with her. He's like, I love her. I just would do anything for her. She's my only friend, and also I'm in love with her. And he does. He's like dedicated to her. But with her comes her friend Luke Sunburn, or Sunborn, not Sunburn, damn. Luke Sunborn, who is sort of heir to a very prestigious warrior family. The Sunborns and Elliot and Luke do not get along. But because Serene is there, they both get along for the sake of Serene. This book is following Elliot from 13 to, I think, 17, until he is 17, and you are following him through his whole like experience at school, his growth of friendship with these two characters, Serene and Luke, as well as other characters. They're not his only friends there. And it is really the story of Elliot learning that he wants to be loved and that he deserves to be loved. As much as he deserves to give those emotions, he deserves to receive them. And it is a heartbreaking, heartwarming, heart melting, heart exploding story. It is so good. It is one of those books that is just written into my soul. I think it's fantastic. I recommend this to everyone. It is a chunker and it is a little bit of a long read, but it is well worth it, especially because the story does wrap up by the end. I don't think I love too many characters the way I love Elliot Schaefer, but I do adore him in so many ways. I think if you really like Fitz from the Farseer trilogy, you will adore Elliot. They're very much patterned after the same cloth. I cried a lot while reading this book. A book that makes me cry tends to get high ratings. Made me feel everything. And it's one of those books that I go back and I'll reread specific favorite passages because I just love them so much. Number 4. Now, I don't think any of these books on this list are particularly surprising, although the order they're in might surprise people. But this one, I think especially, is definitely not going to surprise anyone. I have talked about it ad nauseum. And we're going to talk about it some more. And that is Bramley Hedge, coming in at number 4. This is a collection of all the Bramley Hedge stories by Jill Barklam. These are children's stories. They're very much in the vein of Beatrix Potter. If you haven't heard of Bramley Hedge, I'm so sorry for you. Let me teach you. This is about the mice that live in Bramley Hedge, and basically they're not daily, but little tiny adventures they have. They are children's picture books. They are so charming. They're very detailed and just gorgeous. Jill Barklam put a lot of love into these books, and you can just 100% tell. I fall in love with them. They are very comforting, soothing reads, and this is the one I've already begun rereading this year. I downloaded the audiobooks so that at night when I'm having a hard time falling asleep, I can turn one of them on and listen to a bedtime story, and it's just been really wonderful and wholesome and made me feel really good. There is nothing wrong with Bramley Hedge. It is perfect. Strongly recommend it. I'm giving it to every child in my life, and I specifically recommend the complete collection because then you have them all. And it is a little pricey, but I mean, I've already rereading it. It's worth the price. Before we go into my top 3, I wanted to give some honorable mentions. I'm just gonna do a quick 1 or 2 sentence description / why I loved it for these books, because there are quite a few honorable mentions. All of these were contenders for the top 10, but they just didn't hack it all the way. Winter's Orbit by Everina Maxwell is a arranged / forced marriage trope between 2 foreign allies who basically have to get married to help make sure that a diplomatic conference goes through and that basically the status of their planets maintains what it needs to be. They also find out that the death of one of the characters' previous partner might have been murder, and they start investigating that. It's really good, really cute, kind of has fan fiction tropes. I thought it was more romance than political sci-fi, which was it was fine, but it could have been better. Strike the Zither by Joan Hay. This is a reimagining of The Three Kingdoms, which is a classic of Chinese literature. It follows Zither, it follows Zephyr, who is a strategist, and she basically ends up crossing lines to try to get things done. She's brilliant. She's fantastic. While I was reading this book, I wasn't in love with it, but as soon as I finished the book, I realized how much I had to take away from it, and it was just amazing. And I'm looking forward to book 2, Sound the Gong. 6 Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lim is a retelling of The Goose Girl, and also, I forget what it's called, but it's basically about the brothers who turn into swans. This was really fun. It was definitely a younger YA novel. I read this while I was on vacation, and it was super fun to read while I was on vacation, and a really quick read, which I really enjoyed. And Shiori, she got on my nerves at the beginning, but by the end I did really like her, and I loved the world building. Thought that was a lot of fun. The Makioka Sisters by Junichiro Tanizaki. Why didn't they put the first name on here? Yeah, Junichiro Tanizaki. This is translated by Edward G. Seidensticker. I have a whole reading vlog up for this. I enjoyed this one. It's definitely dense. I mean, this is thick. It was compared a little to Austen. I don't think that is fair, but it is about the sort of gentle political maneuverings of one family that are trying to get one of their sisters wed in order to kind of move on with their life. It is really about the way of the one way of life sort of passing on, and a new way of life, a more modern one, coming to, and a sort of clash of sensibilities there. It is also taking place right on the cusp of World War II, which is sort of a or actually, is it World War II or World War One? Yeah, no, World War II, and it's sort of intense in that way, although in a very subtle way. The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan. I don't even remember why I picked this up, but it was so good. I've never read an Amy Tan before, and I don't read too much literature, but this was fantastic. It is a story of 4 sisters who are living in semi-modern day. It was a bit modern when it came out, so like the early 2000s, I think. Oh, I'm sorry, in 1889. So like the late 80s, and their mothers who emigrated from China for different reasons. It broke my heart and healed my heart. And I loved all the characters, although sometimes I did have a little bit of a hard time following who was related to who, so I'm really glad there was a chart at the beginning of the book, because I kept turning back to that. Lesson in Vengeance by Victoria Lee is the perfect dark academia if you're looking for aesthetic. It is a novel about a girl who is sort of obsessed with the witches that once lived at her school, and after the death of her previous best friend, they were best friends until the one died, she returns to the school for her final year and kind of comes into a relationship with prodigy author Emery, I think her name is. Ellis. Comes into a relationship with Ellis, who's a prodigy author who's spending a year at the school as well, and the two investigate the witches more to help with Ellery's novel. Like I said, aesthetic is fantastic, and also bonus points. There's not a single male or he, him character or person mentioned in this entire text. Everyone uses either she, her, or they, them pronouns, even like the authors that are mentioned. I love that. What a flex. Empire of Gold by Shannon Chakraborty. I did love this entire series. However, I do think Empire of Gold was the standout of them. That's why I'm not saying the entire series. This one was brutal. It pulled things together. I did have a couple issues with the end. I do have a full review of this trilogy up, so check that out if you want my full thoughts. Finally, Belladonna by Adeline Grace. I'm surprised by how much I liked this one. It started off very basic YA, but then really became something a lot more complex. I did not love certain things about the ending, but it was a really satisfying read, and the atmosphere was pitch perfect. Time for the top 3. Coming in at number 3, a book that I keep picking up to reread my favorite parts of. A book that I was thoroughly obsessed when I read it. A book that when I read the description had me frothing at the mouth and checking every day at work to see if we got it in early. A book that has made me a diehard fan of this author. A book that I recommend to everyone, especially if you like reading fan fiction. That book is Ocean's Echo by Everina Maxwell. Yes, this is the second time Everina Maxwell is showing up on this list, although Winter's Orbit was just an honorable mention. Ocean's Echo is phenomenal. It is the best relationship between two characters. The best relationship between two characters in any book I read this year. I am not wrong. I get so giddy thinking about it. It was fantastic. Where Winter's Orbit really was more rom-com than political sci-fi, this was a political sci-fi with a romance thrown in. A very tropey, angsty, tense romance. It takes place in the same part, or the same shared universe as Winter's Orbit, but it is a different part of the universe, and I really liked being able to explore this other aspect of it. It is a very militarized section, zone, I forget how they call it. And here they have characters who are descendants from genetically modified people. And the descendants are born with some of the genetic modifications. So we have Tennel, who, I got their names mixed all together. Yeah, Tennel, so he is rich, he's from a powerful family, he is a reader, so that means he can read minds. This is a much less common of the abilities that people are born with sometimes, and a much more dangerous one. A lot of times powerful readers, and Tennel is a very powerful reader, are basically conscripted into the army because they can sort of read the space between the stars and navigate into dangerous territory. He gets in trouble. His aunt basically sells him and says, "You are joining the army, I'm forcing you." And then we have Surratt. He is a writer. That's not what they call him, but they write. That's like the action. Architects. They're called architects. So Surratt, yes. Surratt is an architect. He's a very powerful architect, but he's never really used his architect powers. Architects are mind controllers. So where readers are mind readers, architects are mind controllers. And they're particularly good at controlling readers, especially when they're synced together. So Surratt is given the opportunity to sort of save his disgraced family a little bit. And that opportunity is a forced sinking with Tennille, which when he realizes it's forced sinking, he's like, absolutely not, we're not doing this. So they decide to pretend until they can get Tennille out of the situation. But then things spiral out of control. This is a book that covers a lot of ground, a lot of space. And there's a lot that happens plot-wise. The romance, the relationship is not the core of it, but it is an important part. And I will say it does a really good job dealing with consent and consent violations and the importance of consent in any relationship, not just sexual or romantic ones. This book fills me with glee and joy, and I actually had to stop recording because I reread one of my favorite passages because I just needed to relive it, and it gave me all those like happy, great emotions. Just I have no complaints. It's fantastic. I think I read this book in like 2 days, and I read it in such a rush, like a fevered rush. I skipped dinner one time. I wasn't even hungry. I was just like, I have to read. I have to know what happens next. That doesn't happen super often, and the fact that it did with this is just a sign that fantastic, amazing, phenomenal, full marks. Coming in at number 2, a book that for a very long time was my number 1, and not just this book, but actually the whole of the series that is out so far and that I read was my number 1 until the actual number 1 book. I read it. This is a book that I don't think I've shut up about. I've brought it up as often as I can. It is pitch perfect from beginning to end. It is but it's a fairly complicated series once you get past book 1, and frustrating in some ways, but very fulfilling in most ways. And yeah, it's one of my best hand sells at work. That is Gideon the Ninth, and the entirety of the Locked Tomb series that is out so far. I am reading or wearing my Nona shirt in honor of Nona, and yeah, Gideon the Ninth. This is lesbian necromancers in space is the elevator pitch I see all the time, and that is a good description, but I think a better description is locked on a planet I don't think it's a spaceship, but they're locked in basically an old decrepit mansion house that someone in there is picking them off and killing them, and maybe it's someone who's there, or maybe it's a ghost, because they're necromancers and they're competing sort of to basically become very, very powerful necromancers. This book was everything. I don't think I could go into it more than that, except to say that it was everything. I was obsessed with it, from the world building to the characters to the atmosphere to just the writing. The intricacies of the plot, the memes made me laugh. I loved them. I was all for them. I am thoroughly and will probably always be obsessed with Locked Tomb series, and I am waiting eagerly for Alecto the Ninth to come out. It's Nona blew my freaking mind. And then number 1, the best book I read this year. I read this book sort of on a whim. It had arrived in one of my book subscriptions, and I was like, it sounds interesting. I'll definitely keep it on my shelf. I don't want to get rid of it, but I'm not crazy for it. And then I saw a review for it that made me go, that sounds good. So I picked it up almost immediately. It was kind of a whim because I really hadn't planned on it. And I think from chapter 2 onwards, I was obsessed. I couldn't stop reading it. I loved the characters. I loved the world building. And more than anything, I loved the throuple at the core of this book. Yes, Tennille and Surratt might have been my favorite couple. Sorry, Gideon, Harrow, I love you guys. I love you guys so much. But Tennille and Surratt are levels above because they have more fanfiction to their relationship. This is my favorite throuple. I don't think I've actually ever read a throuple before, but I did. I really liked it. I thought it was really well portrayed and balanced, and yeah, I loved every character in this. The world building was great. The action was great. It kind of has Witcher vibes. What book am I talking about? I am talking about Silver Under Nightfall by Rin Chupeco. I need book 2 immediately. It is perfect. It is a perfect book. This is the book that I constantly think about rereading. Like every day I'm like, is today the day I start the reread? And I have to stop myself, because if I could, I would probably reread this every month. I'm thoroughly obsessed with it. Oh, it has Witcher vibes. From what I understand, it has Castlevania vibes. I've never watched or played Castlevania, so I cannot confirm, but I think it probably does, if that's what other people say. It is a vampire fantasy world, but not all the vampires are evil. There's different clans of vampires, and some vampires are like people in this world, right? Some of them are good guys, some of them are bad guys. Their allegiances vary, but there is a group of vampires who are infected with something called the rot, and that basically makes them mindless killing machines and not really people anymore, sort of zombies more than they're vampires. And Remy is a vampire and monster hunter, and he starts trying to investigate what is causing the rot and trying to stop it. And he teams up with Xiaodan and Zaidan, and they're an engaged pair of vampires from two powerful, or once powerful clans. And they're both powerful vampires in their own right, and he teams up with them because they're investigating it as well. The three of them have a lot of sexual tension, almost like right off the bat. It's great, and I love their chemistry outside of the sexual tension. They had really great chemistry between the three of them. It was always a delight whenever they were interacting with each other. It is an intense book, a lot of violence. It is very grimdark, and I was living for every blood-spattered second of this book. Thank goodness there's a second one, and I know it's only 2 books. I pray to the book gods that there would be more someday, but I'm dying for book 2. I'm like dying for it. It's so good. They probably are my favorite characters I read all year, and I think about them, especially Remy, all of the time. Just constantly. Those are my favorite books of 2022. Wow. I read a lot of really good books this year. Or last year, I guess. They're fantastic. All of those. I strongly recommend them. Obviously, if you have read any of the books in my top 10, please let me know, because I think if you liked them, that makes us automatic friends. Okay? Seriously, those are my top 10. They were fantastic. I will be posting my most disappointing reads of 2022 next. That'll be the next video you see, and I'm looking forward to doing that one for a very different reason. A lot to say about those books. A lot to say. Thank you for watching. Thank you for sticking around. If you like this content and you want to see more, definitely consider subscribing. I would seriously appreciate it. And if you're already a subscriber, thank you so much for being here. Thank you. I appreciate it so very much. You have no idea. If you are somewhere cold, I hope you're staying warm. If you're somewhere warm, I hope you're staying comfortable. And most of all, I hope you're reading a great book. I will see you guys next time. Bye.